I, Vlad Von Carstein, welcome thee.
The dead do not rest easy. Relentless, implacable, and dreadful. The undead are among the most dangerous opponents in the known world, bound by the will of their vampire. They are a fell and mighty force. They cannot be reasoned with. They cannot be bribed. And they cannot be coerced. They know neither fear nor mercy. They need neither sleep nor warmth, drink nor wholesome sustenance. As they spread across the land, their ranks swell with the corpses and sometimes even the spirits of their slain foes. Today we're diving into the dark and blood-soaked history of one of the most infamous dynasties in the world, the Von Carsteins, and the bloody vampire wars they created. These powerful vampires have left an indelible mark on the world, with their ambition, cruelty, and dark magic shaping the fate of nations. These beings are formidable in combat, with strength and agility that far surpass mortal men. They can raise the dead to serve as their undying armies, and bend others to their will. Among these dark lords of undeath, the Von Carsteins stand out as the most notorious and ambitious. This cursed bloodline has toppled kingdoms and plunged entire regions into chaos. First, we'll focus on the patriarch of this dreaded house, Vlad Von Carstein, the herald of the First Vampire War, the one who damned the province of Sylvania to a cursed landscape, and the one who came so close to overrunning the Empire and imposing his will as a vampire emperor. It is clear that power and strategy are crucial in any epic saga. So let's take a moment to check out Bloodline Heroes of Lithis, where you can forge legendary heroes of your own by merging the ancestries of elves, demigods, orcs, dwarves, lycans, dragonborn, vampires, among others. Leveraging a groundbreaking lineage system and stunning 3D graphics, Bloodline elevates the RPG and gacha game experience to new heights. It is absolutely free to play. Download it now using the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen if you're viewing on a PC. Create new heroes by marrying any two bloodlines of mystical beings to create over 800 new fantasy hybrids. With the new Guild War, players will have the opportunity to engage in combat on brand new maps. Through the conquest of territories and acquisition of rewards, you can construct the most exceptional hybrid champions known as Bloodcraft Legends. To celebrate the second anniversary of the game, a series of exciting events and fantastic rewards are lined up for the Bloodline's vibrant community. The anniversary introduces Lexinial from Clan Arbiter, along with an exclusive main city skin for a visually stunning experience. The event also features strategic battles in the Arbiter's Arena, with special fireworks and torchlighting events, and the ability to join the Convoking Scope event for additional rewards. Download the game now for free using the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen right now. Inactive players logging back in will receive generous return rewards, including a mythic level champion and various other items. The first 30 players who leave their in-game account ID and username in the first pinned comment section below will receive a free legendary female succubus champion and the Shoten, one of the best warriors to carry you in the game. Plus, you can visit the Bloodline Top-Up Center today to get Lith Bucks and unlock premium content and items across the game. Everything from exclusive gear to special upgrades. Don't miss out on our limited-time top-up discount event, offering up to 15% off to enhance your gaming experience with Lith Bucks. Thanks to Bloodline Heroes of Lithis for sponsoring this video. Vlad Von Carstein was the first vampire count of Sylvania, and the founder of the Von Carstein bloodline. He was a figure of legend, a vampire whose cunning and ruthlessness were matched only by his dark charisma. Let us take a moment to have a brief overview of how the vampires came to exist, and how Vlad ended up being one of the most powerful amongst them. The origin of vampires can be traced back to the great necromancer known as Nagash. He was a mortal priest in the ancient land of Nehekara. Nagash was obsessed with the matters of life and its inevitable decay. He had seen how many great warriors and powerful men had succumbed to an unavoidable fate, death. And he was increasingly interested in finding a way to avoid this. He sought to achieve immortality through some dark and forbidden sorcery that he had discovered while being captured by a group of dark elves. After years of experimentation, he created the Elixir of Life, a potent brew distilled from human blood that granted eternal life. Neferata, the Queen of Lamia, learned about this elixir, and a great interest to learn more and even acquire this potent elixir grew in her. Ever since her youth, she had expressed her interest in joining the mortuary cult, but was dismissed by her father, King Lamizah of Nehekara. Instead, she was set to be educated on how to rule the city-state of Lamia, to be ready when she came of age. Through political machinations, and under the malign influence of High Priest Wasarin, Neferata managed to get her hands on the most potent of Nagash's books of necromancy, and pursued her own studies in the dark arts. Eventually, she attempted to replicate the Elixir of Life. She reformulated and distilled the ancient alchemical, but unfortunately, she was not as skilled at necromancy as Nagash himself, and her version was not as potent as the original. In addition, it included a side effect that would prove to be damning for her and eventually thousands of others throughout history. After imbibing the elixir, Neferata no longer seemed to age, but she was possessed by a terrible thirst for blood. All who drank her version of the Elixir of Life were transformed into the first vampires. Instead of becoming superhumanly powerful and immortal, they became a type of undead that required the blood of the living to sustain themselves. Over time, many of the court of Neferata drank the elixir and joined her as vampiric lords and ladies. She became the mother of the vampires, and thus was the dynasty of the Lamian vampires born into the world. They were more cautious than Nagash. They went through great pains and precautions to conceal their new vampiric and blood-drinking practices from the other priest-kings who had forbidden the use of dark magic across the lands. Concealing their true nature, the first vampires reigned like gods over Lamia. Vlad Von Carstein's true name was Vashanesh. He was one of Neferata's disciples, and through work and loyalty, he impressed her, so much so that she granted him the last of her elixirs, turning him into a vampire. He was well known for his martial prowess and his ruthless leadership. His skills and ambition made him a valuable ally to Queen Neferata. As a vampire, Vashanesh's power grew exponentially. he became an unstoppable force on the battlefield. His combat skills, augmented by his newfound immortality and vampiric abilities. He served Neferata loyally, helping consolidate her power in Lamia and expand her influence. However, the reign of the vampires in Lamia was not to last. Gradually, the vampire covens of the city began to grow in confidence, and their excesses only increased. They would not submit to walk the earth like common soldiers, and insisted on being borne upon ornate thrones at all times. Hundreds of slaves entered their palaces every day, and were never seen again. Their increasing predation, and the fear they inspired among the mortal populace, eventually led to their downfall. The united armies of Nehekara, led by the priest-kings of Henry, rose up against the vampires in a bloody and brutal war. Thousands upon thousands of soldiers, under the command of the priest-kings, fought the armies of Lamia and their vampire overlords. Despite their formidable powers, the vampires were eventually overwhelmed by the sheer number and determination of their enemies. During the Fall of Lamia, Vashanesh fought valiantly, but was ultimately forced to flee. The city was sacked, and many of the vampires were killed or scattered across the world. Neferata herself managed to escape, along with a few of her most loyal followers, including Vashanesh. As they were escaping and making their way to safer places, they were soon encountered by the Arch-Necromancer himself, Nagash. The Necromancer offered the vampires a special artifact, a simple yet powerful ring that would bring them back from the dead at supernatural speeds, but would forever bind them to Nagash's will, and that of his most loyal follower, Arkan the Black. Vashanesh was one of the vampires who accepted his gift, willingly becoming Nagash's servant. The vampires who accepted were eager to serve as Nagash's lieutenants, to gain revenge on the armies of King Alcatazar and his fellow priest-kings, and to also fight to take the city of Lamia back. Nagash soon led the vampires towards fierce battles against the priest-kings, fighting legions of Nehekarans in bloody skirmishes and full battles alike. The Vashanesh and the rest of the vampires who accepted Nagash's gifts were eager to serve. It did not take long for them to realize they were nothing but cannon fodder to Nagash. He threw them at his foes with little care if they survived or not. Soon, they resented their service to Nagash, but the ring forced them to obey. Vashanesh, however, was a clever man. He came up with an ingenious solution. The ring bound him to Nagash, so long as he was alive. So at the height of a great battle, he allowed himself to be cut down by Alcatazar, who, with time, would eventually become the man to slay Nagash with a cursed sword, granted to him by the Skaven's shady Council of 13. When Nagash was defeated, the vampires were freed from his control. The many bloodlines soon departed, making their own paths in history. It took many years for Vashanesh to return from the grave. Though Nagash was already dead when Vashanesh returned to life, the ring still bound him to Arkan the Black. So he traveled far away into the old world in search of artifacts to enslave the ring to his will, rather than the other way around. He ended up in Kislev, where he spent centuries testing the limits of the ring and studying the winds of magic, calling himself Prince Vladimir, a minor noble of no great importance. No one knows how much time exactly passed, as the vampire experimented with the powerful artifacts and the manipulation of magic to unbind himself from external control. But eventually, he was seen in Sylvania, and at that point, he was now Vlad Von Carstein, and he had his eyes set upon more than just minor nobility.
I am Vlad Von Carstein. Choose thy words with care.
For centuries had Vlad von Carstein sought after satisfying the natural desire for power that all vampires have. For centuries had he hid himself within the many courts of nobles from inside the human nations of Kislev and the Empire. For centuries had he schemed and maneuvered his way to the top. For centuries had he also restrained himself. But no more. In a display of his political genius, Vlad had taken control of the province of Sylvania from the despotic Count Otto von Drac, who upon his deathbed had left no heir but his daughter, Isabella von Drac. Seizing his opportunity, Vlad stormed into their household, Castle Drakenhof, and presented himself to the dying count and his daughter, citing his many noble antecedents. Soon after, he claimed the wide-eyed Isabella as his bride, and their marriage ceremony took place in the same room where the dying count rested. Just like that, Vlad and Isabella were in charge of Sylvania. Vlad appeared just as strange as the old Otto von Drac. He never ate in front of his servants. He never traveled. Or, at least he was never seen outside in the daylight. Several of the long-serving keep staff were soon let go, and their places were occupied by enigmatic outsiders.
The new count, Vlad as he's supposedly called, is a mysterious figure. We don't know much about him, and his foreign friends who come and go from the castle give me the chills with their cloaks and hoods. They speak in whispers, their eyes hidden in the shadows of their hoods, and they move through the shadows like ghosts. The castle itself seems more alive at night, with strange lights flickering in the windows and eerie sounds echoing through the halls. But for all the strangeness, life's been a bit calmer since he took over. He doesn't impose the harsh taxes or random executions that we suffered under the previous count. There's a sense of order, even if it comes with an undercurrent of unease. Maybe there's hope for us yet.
The people of Sylvania continued with their everyday lives, disregarding the foreign visitors of the castle, who were often cloaked and hooded, despite the fact that the new count appeared to be less authoritarian than the previous one. They had grown accustomed not to challenge the actions of their superiors by years of harsh Von Drac administration. For the poorer classes, the only comfort was that the new count at least didn't order senseless killings or demand outrageous taxes just for the sake of it. He ruled from Castle Drakenhof, the ancestral seat of power for the rulers of Sylvania. The castle is a massive Gothic structure built from black stone, giving it a menacing and somber appearance. With time, the castle turned to feature darker and more sinister figures, surely influenced by the rule of Vlad. Eventually, the architecture reached a point where it was a mix of practical fortification and dark, almost Baroque ornamentation, with gargoyles and other statues adorning its walls, seemingly watching all who approach with unblinking eyes. At the heart of Castle Drakenhof lies the Grand Throne Room, a vast chamber with a high vaulted ceiling, supported by massive pillars carved with scenes of ancient battles and dark rituals. The room is dimly lit by flickering torches and chandeliers made of bone, casting eerie shadows across the stone floor. Vlad's throne, a massive, ornately carved seat of black wood and iron, sits on a raised dais at the far end of the room. It is here that Vlad holds court, receiving emissaries, issuing commands, and plotting his next moves. With time, the relationship between the now Isabella von Carstein and Vlad von Carstein soon grew into something more than just a marriage of convenience. Vlad developed a love for her, and when eventually Isabella wished for the blood kiss and to be converted into a vampire like him, Vlad refused to give it to her, as he knew the true, deep suffering of beings like him, and loved her far too much to witness her endure that. Some days later, however, Isabella had developed a rare terminal disease. According to the doctors who attended her, her heart had stopped. Vlad had turned the doctors away, saying that he would take care of her himself. Vlad knew that she was sick with the same incurable disease that had claimed her father. With much pain, Vlad had no choice but to turn his lover into a vampire, saving her life, but at a great cost. Isabella declared herself fully recovered when she emerged in front of her people 3 days later. But from then on, she remained frail and pale, only emerging from her chambers by moonlight. With Sylvania under his iron grip and Castle Drakenhof secured as his seat of power, Vlad von Carstein's ambitions grew ever grandiose with time. His marriage to Isabella von Drac had not only solidified his claim to the region, but also brought him a devoted and cunning partner, one who he loved. Now united in their eternal bond, Vlad and Isabella became a formidable force, their combined power and influence unmatched. Over the years, more and more nobles were beginning to be seen less often, their skin growing ever paler, and their presence being felt late into the dark nights of Sylvania. Accidents of all kinds happened all the time in the province, but strangely enough, only those who were against or declared their independence from the rule of Vlad suffered rare and deadly accidents. With time, all came to realize the dangers of opposing Count Vlad, and many swore their allegiance to him out of fear. Slowly but surely, priests of Sigmar and of Mor began to withdraw from the province, being cast out, chased away, or assassinated. In less than a decade, Vlad had established a stronger hold over Sylvania than the Elector Counts had over the entire empire.
We have much to discuss, and thou art most welcome.
Some people from outside the province even said that Vlad should actually be seated on the imperial throne because of his success as a ruler. Of course, they didn't know the true inner machinations at play during his dark reign. But worse was to come for Sylvania. A mysterious disease, similar to the one that had afflicted Isabella and her father, began to strike the other noble families. Soon enough, every major castle in Sylvania was inhabited by nocturnal, pallid individuals who ruled mercilessly and arrogantly. The number of missing people increased exponentially, leading to the establishment of grim watchposts along the borders, restricting movement in and out of Sylvania. The sickness led many peasants to abandon their faith in the gods and turn to the cult of the arisen dead. The temples of the old world pantheons were desecrated and closed. Without proper burial rites, the bodies of the dead piled up along the roads, their tormented spirits left to roam without rest. The architecture of the region changed too over time, displaying ornaments and designs that referenced death. The greatest sign of the impending darkness came in the year 2000 of the imperial calendar, when a massive Warpstone meteorite destroyed the Ostermark capital, Mordheim. Once a pious city, Mordheim had become a cesspit of decadence and corruption. The meteorite left shards of warpstone scattered across the ruins, attracting various claimants to the imperial throne and nobles who had sent mercenary companies to gather the mysterious stone, hoping to manipulate its false properties of healing or turning lead into gold. Vlad Von Carstein quickly took advantage of this chaos. While others sought the Warpstone for their personal gain, Vlad sent his dark minions into the ruins to collect as much of it as possible for grander ambitions. It would be another decade before the strange seeds harvested from that blighted city would bear fruit. At the start of winter, in the year 2010 of the imperial calendar, Vlad began to take the next step of his plan. After killing the remaining living nobility of Sylvania, Vlad casted a powerful spell, fueled by the warpstone he collected from the ruins of Mordheim. The spell flowed over the unguarded cemeteries of the Gardens of Mor, and in an instant, all throughout the province, the dead began to stir and rise from their resting places. Slowly, every single corpse in Sylvania began to move towards Drakenhof to answer the call of the vampire count. With this, Vlad managed to bring the dead of the province back to life as a horde of putrid slaves under his command. When it was all done, the invasion of the Empire of Man would begin in that same year. Stefan Fischer, a witch hunter, was one of the very few to escape the cursed Sylvania. As he fled the province, he was picked up by a roaming band of vampires that sought to join the growing vampiric host of Vlad Von Carstein, but was saved by a detachment from the army of Ottila III, Elector Countess of Talabecland. The armed force was sent to investigate the growing threat. All of this necromantic activity had not gone unnoticed. They were all warned of the upcoming danger by the witch hunter, who then joined the main army, led by General Hans Schleifen, to face the growing undead force. As the undead forces crossed the River Ster, they were met by the valiant and courageous men sent by Ottila at the Essen Ford, in what would become the first battle of the Vampire Wars. The undead horde blackened the horizon with its numbers. The cursed army marched slowly, their formations suffering catastrophic losses, with volleys of crossbow bolts and gunpowder fire tearing holes in the incoming mass of bodies. But still, the necromantic powers commanded by Vlad and his thralls was too much, resurrecting every single loss they suffered, marching onwards without stopping. As the heavy Imperial cavalry struck the undead ranks, Vlad sprung his trap, encircling the exposed Imperial infantry with the heavily armed Drakenhof Guard, leading a charge of Black Knights and Wraiths, crushing the Imperials.
I have not seen such a pathetic sight since mine father-in-law Otto took his last breath. Is this all that thine empire can muster?
The war continued for another 40 bloody years after the events at the Essen Ford. Wherever Vlad and his army went, their dark shapes put an aura of death and despair upon the Empire. The lands they traversed were left in ruin, villages and towns emptied of life, their inhabitants either slaughtered or risen to join the ranks of the undead. The skies seemed perpetually overcast during these dark times. Throughout the war, Vlad employed dark magic and necromancy to devastating effect. His mastery over the winds of Shaiish, the lore of death, allowed him to summon and control vast armies of the dead. Entire cemeteries and burial grounds were emptied of their occupants, who rose to serve their dark master. His lieutenants, powerful vampires in their own right, led sorties and raids deep into Imperial territory, spreading terror and chaos.
The thought of the undead army choking the Empire sent shivers down my spine. I fled to Altdorf, believing it would be safe, but now I see the fears in everyone's eyes. Every night, we hear rumors of villages falling, and the cries of those who barely escaped the clutches of Vlad's minions. The city's gates are heavily guarded, and yet I can't shake the feeling that it's only a matter of time before the darkness reaches us here. No place is safe anymore. Not even here in the capital. It feels like the darkness is closing in on us from all sides, suffocating us. There's nowhere left to run. Even the once bustling markets are now filled with hushed whispers and anxious glances, as if the shadows themselves are watching and waiting. We're all just holding our breath, waiting for the inevitable.
The dead far outnumbered the living, and the reanimated corpses of fallen soldiers swelled Vlad's forces after every battle. It was a war of attrition, where the Empire's losses fed the strength of the enemy. At the Battle of Bluthof, Vlad found himself impaled by lances, with the rune fang from the Count of Ostland buried whole within his heart. And yet he reappeared 3 days later to execute the prisoners in Bluthof. Whilst at the town of Bogenhofen, he led his undead army to victory after being decapitated by a cannonball only hours before. Each and every time, again, Vlad was able to rise back to life in order to kill his murderers and advance further into the capital of the Empire. The Grand Master of the Order of the White Wolf himself, Jarek Kruger, had killed Vlad Von Carstein in battle, only to be turned into a vampire by the Count as a grim revenge only a year later. After multiple battles and encounters that at first seemed like victories, but were soon turned into terrible losses, all hope seemed lost to the Empire, as the undead army eventually began its slow march towards the great capital of Altdorf. When the army of the dead arrived in Altdorf, capital of the Empire, Vlad gave his ultimatum: open the gates and serve him in life, or continue to fight and serve him in death. Yet the city would not surrender. They were well prepared for the upcoming attack, even against the dire menace the undead army represented. They had manned the walls and prepared as much as they could for the siege. The Grand Theogonist, Wilhelm III, High Priest of the cult of Sigmar, isolated himself within the catacombs of the Cathedral of Altdorf to pray. When he emerged once more, he claimed that the Empire would be saved. Felix Mann, the greatest thief of the age, was a prisoner of the Empire, but during this dire situation, he had been given an offer to go on the most dangerous mission of his life, or to be executed for his crimes. And so, Felix Mann had departed for Vlad Von Carstein's encampment. In the middle of the night, the thief managed to slip past the undead encampment with stealth and treachery. His mission: to steal the magical ring from Vlad's finger. Felix Mann succeeded on his mission, and then he disappeared into the night. It is said that Manfred von Carstein was the one that orchestrated this move, in order to steal the power of the vampire count. Being unable to challenge Vlad himself, he chose to betray him, using his own twisted methods, and revealed the source of Vlad's immortality to Wilhelm. When Vlad von Carstein realized his ring had been stolen, he ordered an immediate attack on the city. He was beyond enraged, and he threw everything he had against Altdorf. The undead army advanced under the burning will of the vampire count, and great siege towers made of bone and flesh, held together by dark magic, lumbered forward to the city walls in a slow but inexorable advance.
My sword thirsts, and so it shall be slaked in the blood of living fools that think to challenge the might of von Carstein. Let the slaughter begin!
The walls of Altdorf were manned by swordsmen, and the gates had been reinforced. The capital of the Empire would try to hold back the tide. The battle turned into a vicious fight for survival. The number of undead warriors proved overwhelming for the defenders. The men of the Empire fought with all their strength and valor against the horrors of the undead. The sight of fallen brothers in arms being reanimated into half-dead monsters was terrible for the living soldiers' morale. The shambling corpses of their friends and comrades, now twisted into grotesque parodies of life, struck fear into even the bravest hearts. Time was vital, and with each passing minute, more men fell to the tide of death that the vampire count had brought upon the capital of the Empire of Man. Despite the fear and exhaustion, they fought on, driven by the knowledge that Altdorf's fall would mean the doom of the Empire. Vlad personally fought his way into the city, slaughtering all in his path. At the center of the vast struggle that engulfed the city, the Grand Theogenist clashed with Vlad Von Carstein. Holy hammer against magical blade. After intense fighting, Vlad gained the upper hand. Wilhelm became tired, while the vampire did not. The vampire count eventually overcame him. Sensing that the end was near, and with his final dying breath, Wilhelm III charged his foe headlong and flung himself and Vlad over the battlements. The two fell together on a wooden spike at the wall's foot. Without the protection from his magical ring, Vlad von Carstein screamed in pain. This time, impaled in place, his body twitched and flailed, until finally, Vlad von Carstein had died. With the Count killed, the armies of undead began to fall apart, the dark magic that sustained them fleeing from their bodies. The siege had to be lifted when the rest of the vampire counts began to fight amongst themselves for control of the crumbling army. Unable to face eternity without her husband, Isabella von Carstein impaled herself on a stake and withered into a pile of dust. Vlad's corpse was buried face down in a coffin. The horrors of what would later be called the First Vampire War were finally over. The First Vampire War and the Rise of Vlad Von Carstein is a story of power and terror. From his transformation into a vampire to his unyielding ambition to conquer the Empire. In our next installment in this series, we'll delve into the next chapter of the Vampire Wars, exploring the rise of Conrad von Carstein. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Vlad's reign and the First Vampire War. So drop a comment below and let us know your favorite part of this tale. If you want to explore the province of Sylvania in its current state through the eyes of Stefan Hoffman, Doctor of Biology and Zoology, we recommend this video for you to watch next. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.